The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is 9.5 after 8. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Ensuring effective representation of citizens by their elected representatives. That's quite important. Also, expanding meaningful participation of citizens in our democracy. These are just some of the issues that were raised at a civil society conference on South Africa's legislature. It was held in Cape Town last week, over 2 days. And we'll be talking about that, because ultimately the question here is how effective are South Africa's public participation and accountability processes in Parliament as well as in the provincial legislatures. You may have participated in some of these processes and have views about how effective they are. Please talk to us this morning then on 0891 104 208. 0891 104 208. Also, we'll be taking SMSs at 34701 34701. You can send me an email at gwalax@sabc.co.za. Just examining these institutions, examining Parliament and provincial legislatures as institutions of public participation as well as accountability here in this country. Let's talk to some of the participants then in that conference which took place last week. I'll start with Zaki Ahmed. He's with the Social Justice Coalition. He's in our Sea Point studios. Mr. Ahmed, good morning to you. Mr. Ahmed, can you hear me?
How are you doing?
I'm very well. Hi, are you well?
No, excellent, thank you.
Fantastic. I'll come back to you in a minute. But let me also welcome from our Durban studios, Sizani Ngubane with the Rural Women's Movement. Sizani, good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks indeed for making time to talk to us this morning. Also, we are joined on the line by Bishop Lunga Gasiboto, who was representing the Christian community in the conference. Bishop Gasiboto, good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Thank you very much for your time. Let me start with Mr. Ahmed. Just and I said that this was to investigate this effectiveness of South Africa's public participation and accountability. If you were to sum up the feelings of the NGOs, and there were a lot of them, the civil society organizations, about 14 of them participating in this conference, and also a number of very prominent South Africans who also participated in this conference. What is the view?
I think, Xolani, the first thing to say is that there was an acknowledgement that there was some at least our parliamentarians from National Parliament and the provincial legislatures made an effort to come and to discuss these things. So that was welcome. But I think the overall feeling by everyone was that since 1999, our parliament has become totally dysfunctional and has become dysfunctional in what I would say at least three areas. Mm-hmm. The first is legislation. And if you look at it from the Medicines and Related Substances Act right through to the Sexual Offences Act, it seems that Parliament, and this would include the opposition, has failed to properly scrutinize legislation for loopholes which either the very powerful or even criminals could have abused. And that's a very serious danger. The second area was accountability, where ministers and directors general and a range of people are not held, officials are not held accountable. So, for instance, the dangers we see in terms of deep instability in our country today arises from the fact that no one, including me, know who our constituency MP is. No one knows how Parliament, and by this I don't mean the NGOs, the civil society, the religious leaders and so on. By this I don't mean that. Most ordinary citizens and people living in South Africa do not know how Parliament or any legislature work, and sometimes not even definitely how municipal councils work. Mm-hmm. So accountability. The other area is financial oversight. Mm-hmm. Almost every major service delivery and other department, whether it's justice or SAPS or education, housing, human settlements and so on, everyone has had a qualified audit, including health, for more than 15 years. But neither the executive nor Parliament has held one person accountable for misspending. One department, one DG. No one has been held accountable in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. And that has led to a culture where our parliament, our bureaucracy believes that it can get away with doing the least And sometimes, and I'm not saying every public servant is like that, but certainly a significant number are involved in looting our state. And the last thing I would say is, because there's not this oversight, you have a situation. You imagine the constituency MPs in Limpopo or in Western Cape were functioning. In the Western Cape, since August 2010, there have been stockouts of medicines, chronic medicines. I'm not talking about antiretrovirals. I'm talking about heart medicines, which lead to people's deaths, asthma medicines, diabetes, cancer, and so on. There have been stockouts until at least July this year. And the Premier, neither the Premier nor the Western Cape Legislature has held Theuns Botha, the Minister in Health, accountable for that those shortcomings.
All right.
Similarly with Limpopo.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to you because I need to find out whether are these just sentiments, or is there a scientific way within which we can then say these are the standards, and if we look at the performance of our parliament, then we can say they are below the standard. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me go to Sizani Ngubane again and find out whether she agrees with you, and if she does, why is 1999 a significant year here? Because Zaki is starting off with the 1999. He says since 1999 there's been this dysfunction. Sizani?
Yeah, I do agree with Ahmed. As the Rural Women's Movement, we are looking at three issues, which is the accessibility, the affordability, the time, and the complexity of the process. If we're talking about accessibility, I will make an example of the Rural Women's Movement. The movement is made up of 50,000 women, and like 50% of them did not have an opportunity to get formal education. Mm-hmm. And some of us cannot read and write. And when these pieces of legislations are presented to us, they are presented in a foreign language. None of them are presented to us in our local languages. And if we're talking about the affordability of the process, it's an expensive process. One has to hire a lawyer in order to be able to understand how parliament functions and even how local government functions. One has to have an assistant of a legal expert. And if we talk about the time, I will make an example of the process around the Traditional Courts Bill. When we were informed by Parliament that there will be public education and public hearings in our communities, we were only given 6 weeks to prepare for the public hearings. And at the public hearings, there was a lot of intimidation from the chiefs, who wouldn't even allow us to speak, and we were shouted down. So it was not easy for us.
So in other words, you say the process does not protect women?
It doesn't protect women at all. And if one talks about time, it also reminds me about the process in 2003, where we challenged the government about the constitutionality of the Communal Land Rights Act of 2004. That process was an expensive process. We had to send a group of between 10 and 12 women to Parliament in Cape Town to present our submissions, and to fly 12 people from KwaZulu-Natal to Cape Town and accommodation was an expensive process for RWM. And we won the battle against the government, because in May 10, 2010, the Constitutional Court declared the Communal Land Rights Act as unconstitutional. But up till today, we don't know what is going to happen about the Communal Land Rights Act, whether they are going to draft another Communal Land Rights Act or what. The government manages the time and manages what will happen, when and how.
All right, but let me bring in the Bishop. Bishop Kasiboto, I suppose the broad question is whether or not some of the problems that have already been raised are by design or by default. Do you think that it's deliberate that people are left out, or is it because of the difficulties associated perhaps with trying to get everybody on board?
Thank you. I think it is the nature of things that when you start off, you may not be firing on all cylinders. I think the point needs to be made that from the part of religion, for instance, since 1994, there's a sense in which we probably removed our foot a little from the pedal. And it's only now that we're garnering our efforts to be alongside the rest of civil society and trying to determine a useful future for the rest of society.
That's interesting because interesting because you're suggesting that civil society itself is to blame for some of the things that have happened. That people have not been assertive enough.
That point came out very strongly. That rather than pointing a finger, we actually need to look at ourselves. How broadly consultative are we as structures of civil society? How much do we do that? And an undertaking is made to do something serious about that. Mm-hmm. But the other point I wanted to make is that it is positive, the willingness of representatives of legislatures, both provincial and national, to be in consultation and bare their breast and confess to shortcomings. And there is a willingness on the part of government as well as civil society, as I saw, to approach one another and get to a resolution of problems that we might be having. All
right, I'll come back. And by the way, the lines are open. If you have a view on this, you can give me a call on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208, 34701, the SMS line here, 34701, emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za, gwalax@sabc.co.za. Mr. Ahmed, let me come back to you. Two questions for you. The one I asked a little earlier on about the standards, whether they're just sentiments or are there standards that should be maintained here. But secondly, perhaps just as a follow-up, I really would like to know why this 1999 is important. You started off there.
Yeah. Xolani, just first the standards, because that's actually quite easy. Parliament, in I think it was 2003, asked former MP Pregs Govender to head Parliament's own commission into undertaking how Parliament works, whether it's been effective and so on. And what that commission found was whether it's participation, affordability, as Mangubane mentioned, whether it was how Parliament drew up legislation, any range of things were a problem. So it went through systematically in terms of the Constitution, what Parliament's and legislation, what the Parliament's duties are, and how it needs to function. And it saw very clearly that there were shortcomings. Now, Parliament hasn't implemented any, most of the recommendations of that committee. And there are benchmarks against internationally which we could look at functioning legislatures. What we must understand is that it's not only our Parliament that is such a huge problem. If you look at the United States Senate and House, they are totally beholden to huge money. So that's something I'd like to come back to later, if I might.
Because it would be interesting to know whether ours is also becoming a little beholden to money.
Exactly, and there are 2 points I'd like to make, if I may just quickly make them. The one is that the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission many years ago made a recommendation that we should adopt a mixed parliamentary system, and Parliament tabled that report but has never discussed it. What that report wanted was that we should, at one level, elect our MPs directly on constituency basis, and then about 2/3 of MPs should come on proportional representation so that we ensure that minority groups and minority parties are represented in Parliament. And again, Parliament has totally ignored its own commission. The last point is there was a case in court, I think it was brought by IDASA, where IDASA asked for disclosure of party funding. And every party undertook to the court under oath and affirmation that they would in fact address the question in Parliament. And the court said, well, it's not my place to do it now. I would hope that Parliament is going to do it. The parties have undertaken, and I have no reason to believe that they won't. And again, that happened. So to take you back to 1999, I think the questions of the arms deal seriously undermined Parliament, because then it became clear that committees were closing off, particularly the ANC members on the committee were closing off discussion and oversight. And the first few years of democracy, I can tell you Parliament functioned exceptionally well. I can tell you from my work that I did in the AIDS Law Project on the Employment Equity Act, on the Medical Schemes Act and so on, the women who participated in the termination of pregnancy, Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act, all of them had a sense that Parliament was listening, and we all had that sense. And I think the Bishop is right and we pointed that civil society got so tired because Parliament wasn't listening that we started running to courts instead of dealing. Which is necessary. One should never say courts aren't necessary to hold government accountable, but we should have put a lot more effort into making our representative function for us.
Again, I'm going to go to Mangubane, because some people listening will say, but, so what's the point? I mean, if they aren't as effective, how does it affect us? What are the consequences then of some of the problems that you are raising?
In order for a strong, accountable government, we need a strong civil society which is going to hold the government accountable. And if the government isn't communicating that well with the civil society, that cannot happen easily.
Right. There are some calls, and I'm going to come to you, Bishop, in a minute. There are some calls, SMSs. Perhaps I should start with the SMSs, and please just take note of these SMSs. I'm going to ask my guests to respond to them in a minute. There's Adam Gabi in Groudville who says, we need a strong civil society, but we must not create an impression that civil society is neutral. Some NGOs are funded by right-wing funders. That's an SMS from Adam Gabi in Groudville. Paseka Makoti says, with a 50% pay cut, South Africa's National Assembly should be increased by 100% to improve its mandate for the greater wishes of our nation. Brian Kumalo in Pietermaritzburg, this is interesting, says it has disconnected and it is dysfunctional precisely because it has become more intellectual and so elite to certain groups. And that's why Parliament then is dysfunctional, according to Brian Kumalo in Pietermaritzburg. Sianda says, why are you leaving out councillors? The weaknesses in government emanates from electing weak people. For example, Mamkize elected because she burnt Impepo. That's from Sianda. Right, let me take one or two calls then before the news headlines. Let me start with Motala in Durban. Motala, good morning.
Morning, sir.
Hi.
Now,
welcome.
the fundamental problem in South Africa is the fact that the members representing the party in power are not appointed because of their principal ideological beliefs. Anybody can become a member, starting right from the extreme left to the right. And their practices are therefore not in conformity to the principal struggle. That is, they are not primarily obliged to carry out their principal mandate, since they are not compelled by their beliefs, and their own party is not rigid in enforcing the principal ideological struggle.
All right, that's Motala in Durban. Quickly, let's go to Jonathan in Maritzburg. Hello, Jonathan.
Good morning, Xolani. Good morning to your guest.
Hi, welcome.
Xolani, you know what? The biggest problem we have is that our president, Jacob Zuma, has promised to stamp out corruption and theft. But it just gets worse and worse and worse every day. I don't think that there's one department in government that is not corrupt and that is stealing money. And we should hold the president to account. if he cannot do his job, he must get out and get someone else there, because he's a man that makes a final decision in his party, and he is failing. He is failing. All they do, the ANC, is that they move people from one position to another position, and you never hear of anyone going through the courts and being caught and put into jail, and that money returned to the coffers of the state.
Okay,
so at the end of the day, we've got a useless president.
All right, that's Jonathan's view. Jonathan is in Maritzburg. But remember the question that we're asking today. Of course, we're looking at the effectiveness of our parliament and our legislatures as a forum for participation for everybody and representation of citizens by their elected representatives. What are your thoughts then on that? 34701. We'll be going back to the lines then. For now, though, we're talking about the effectiveness of South Africa's public participation and accountability processes in Parliament and in the provincial legislatures. And there was a very interesting question here, Bishop Gasiboto, about the involvement of councils as well in this discussion. Were they involved at all?
The conference acknowledged that there are three spheres of government. But this initial one had a concentration of representatives from the national parliament as well as provincial legislatures. The point was made, however, that a sequel would be necessary to involve at the level of local council. That's where the service delivery meets the people. But if I may quickly add two other points relating to a few calls from the from the public. One was related to transparency in government. One of the number of recommendations that were made specifically to Parliament for the attention of legislation was the issue of party funding. This is a contentious issue. It emerged from the conference that some decisions are made not so much on the information and inclination of the party, but it could very well be influenced by the funder. Political parties, without exception, are reluctant to disclose who are actually funding them. Yet we know that if you pay the piper, you call the tune. So we are insisting that there should be at least a disclosure who's funding our political parties. And the other strong request that was made was revisiting the electoral system. At local government, we have a mixture between representatives elected directly by the community and those appointed by the party. We are saying there is logic in extending that to both provincial and national level. There have been research done in these regards, and we wish government to continue to make, when they seek to establish commissions with findings, that those findings be taken seriously. So that's the point that have been made.
Sure, but I just wonder, Bishop, why civil society thinks that these two questions in particular will be discussed and taken up this time, particularly those two questions of mixed parliamentary system as well as the political party funding. These two have been going on for a very long time in this country, and clearly there's been no movement. Why do you think this time people will be keen and interested to discuss them?
Well, I do not know whether they were being nice to us. Those parties, those government officials that were participating were saying that there is a possibility and there is an intention to apply their minds afresh to the issues that are being raised. However, they stand to gain by listening to what people are saying and to demonstrate why it is that they would insist that foreign party funding should not be disclosed. Another level that's worrying is a tendency, it was declared in some parties, that even party political members who are in the legislatures are not free to make a determination of what direction they should make. It's people at the headquarters of a particular party that determine the decisions. And these, we feel, are not you are not respecting the very people who are saying we've elected that they can make their decision.
Right.
And another level is of influence of international bodies, Bretton Woods institutions, the WTO. How much sovereignty do countries have? Those are the issues that civil society is raising for.
All right, I'll take some more calls, but come back to Mr. Ahmed in particular, because I would like you to respond to that question from Brian Kumalo, who was saying that perhaps the reason why there's this disconnect, that there's this dysfunction, is because these institutions have become too intellectual and they are elitist in their approach. But let me hear from Joe in Durban first. Hello, Joe.
Good day, Tolan. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for your call.
You know, my sentiments are that if people are being involved in public participation in government, their concerns should be taken into consideration and be acted on. But it doesn't help if people continue being involved, and then eventually, our government takes a draconian position whereby they impose what they want to do, irrespective of what people say.
Examples?
A simple example would be that of Sanral. They're going ahead with it, knowing that, people really don't like what is happening. And then another one is that of the rich man cult. In government, people are rich. And still, they went on to increase their salaries, irrespective of the public outcry. People are saying, the gap is increasing. And this is just a runaway fire. The government should be in a position to listen to the people, see what the sentiments of the people are, and then from there, they can implement. But even if people do participate, and eventually your participation is not implemented, like the panelists there, they're saying the same thing, basically,
All
but
right.
even if you do participate, it will take maybe another court ruling, so that this thing can happen.
Okay, Joe.
So I don't think it's happening. It's helping if our government won't listen to the people.
That's Joe in Durban. Sipo in Johannesburg. Hello, Sipo.
Morning, Tolan,
Hi,
and
welcome.
to your guests. Tolan, one thing that strikes me in the debate as we talk of constitutional democracy, Tolan, what I've not heard, and I will want to hear from them, the role of the institutions supporting democracy, what you will say, Chapter 9. And last week on your show, you had the Human Rights Commission. It is very important to make those institutions, Kolani, accessible to the people and then visible by funding them and by allowing people, as one of your colleagues was saying, the duty to consult when you are doing legislation, that you don't only do hearings in Cape Town, but you make parliament, you take parliament to the people. You don't ask people to come to the parliament. And another last point, Kolan, it was the issue of, in the parliament, again, as one has raised the issue of the language, accessibility of parliamentary debates in the community media, not only through high levels of where there's only debates and there is no effective participation of the communities. And again, Kolan, you will understand that the issues that Parliament has to deal with are ordinary daily issues that people are facing, including service delivery issues, including even issues of making parliamentarians accountable. So those are the challenges, Tolan. But like I've said, the role of institutions supporting democracy have to be brought in rather than looking at social movements.
All right, that's Sipo in Johannesburg. By the way, we're talking about the effectiveness of the public participation and accountability processes in our parliament and in our provincial legislatures. I'm taking your calls, 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Mr. Ahmed, a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think, again, the question goes to dysfunctionality. A lot of it deals with Parliament's discussions not being able to be understood by the majority of people in the country, the vast majority of people, I would say. I would say that our Parliament is sadly devoid of debate that is reasonable and actually deliberates on an informed basis. A party tables a report or a piece of legislation, and then there's a screaming match between the two sides. It looks like sometimes it looks like two soccer teams, supporters challenging each other, and sometimes actually quite rudely. Instead of us seeing the people who we elect to represent us taking every issue seriously and debating it on its merits. So it's not an intellectual parliament. It is a parliament that screams at each other over very complex issues, which then becomes totally mired in invective rather than thinking. So that would be one thing I'm saying. Just on the Chapter 9 institutions, I agree totally with the caller. I think it was Sipo who raised it. And he said, that they should be properly funded. They should also be staffed by people who are independent. It shouldn't be the luck of the draw that you get a good commissioner or a good person. It should be a process where party politics does not enter into who we select for these positions. They should really be independently minded people. And I think that's also a question. It's the funding as well as the independent minded, and making these institutions accessible at community level. I want to return to the question of directly electing your MP.
Yeah.
The question of that is that we can today, if our councillor doesn't work, they can get deselected at the next election. If a parliamentarian doesn't work, we can't deselect that parliamentarian. The party can keep the person on for 20 years, and we have no say in it. When it comes to money, I would like to know who owns my political party. And that is vital. How do members influence decisions if either the Germans can give money to political parties, or the Libyans can give money to political parties, or British Aerospace can give? Those are the sorts of things that is vital, and it's comprehensive party funding, because we want to see our parties functional. But parties should be functional in relation to the members who take them seriously.
But as I was pointing out a little earlier on, that there seems to be a rejection of that concept of people, of transparency in the funding all round. All political parties seem to be rejecting that. So how do you make them turn around?
Well, every ANC conference has made a decision to openly disclose funding. I would hope that the latest policy conference that was held the other day, I think in Midrand, that at least those decisions should be taken very seriously. I would hope that our Speaker and the Justice and Constitutional Development Committee in Parliament will give us an undertaking before the end of this session of Parliament that in the first session of next year there'll be new legislation to look at the electoral reform and party funding.
But Mamgubane, the same question applies to NGOs, according to Mr. Mgabi in Groundville, who says, well, don't assume that all civil society organizations are neutral. Some of them are funded by right-wing funders, he says.
That is very true. As NGOs, we are also fragmented. In some situation, we don't know who is doing what and where. And the issue of finance also comes in, because in order for us to work as a strong civil society, we need to have resources to do that.
And even in that particular instance, he who pays the piper then calls the tune.
Exactly.
Right.
That is true.
Let me read some
something
emails.
there.
Oh, you want to say something there? Yeah.
Most of our civil society organizations declare our funding. So you can see who's influenced by a right-wing organization, maybe influenced by a right-wing organization or not. The government doesn't do, the political parties don't do the same.
All right. Let me read some emails here. There's one from, Mazef? It says, we live and work in rural areas of the Northwest Province. This is not highly populated area. We cannot make contact with our councillor, as has been the case for the last 16 years. If we take it up with Chief Whip in Rustenburg Municipality, we may see him or her, but it means that people here have no way to voice their difficulties, lack of services, etc. And this is quite interesting here, Bishop, because some people are saying that if we had effective public participation mechanisms, things such as these service delivery protests will not be happening.
Exactly.
At least not in the, with the regularity in which they are happening now.
It goes to the point of civic organizations themselves extending this public participation amongst the community as well. The intention has been made that we as civil society organs need to up our tempo in terms of involving the people of God in issues that affect their lives.
An email from Sigyn Randberg. Our parliament has repeatedly subverted democracy and the rule of law, for example, by passing the secrecy bill to hide ANC corruption, by replacing the independent Scorpions with ANC lackeys called Hawks, and by inaugurating Shabi Sheikh's partner in crime as president. That's according to Sigyn Randberg. Another email from Tsepo Moyane says, our parliament is failing in its core mandate of making the executive accountable. It is failing to even make its MPs accountable to it. I live close to a parliamentary parliamentary constituency office, not even once have I heard that the ANC is a constituency or has a constituency meeting in that office. And I wonder if the MPs of that office provide minutes to Parliament as to whether he interacts with the community or not. That's Tsepo Moyane. I'd also like to know what's happening in as far as making the executive accountable, in particular, Mr. Ahmed. Because now and again we see the ministers going to Parliament and being asked questions. Is that not enough?
It definitely. Well, the difficulty is, like I said right at the beginning, is if you look at all the Auditor General reports, no Minister or Director General has been held properly accountable for what has gone wrong. Parliament sometimes calls a minister. It was only after outcry that the SAPS Commission, the SAPS Committee, called in former General Beckett Cele or Richard Mdluli. Again, with the Limpopo textbook crisis, it took forever to get Parliament to even start considering that issue. Parliament should have been on it. But here I want to say something about civil society. It's important that we understand that court should be our last resort. We need to make Parliament function, and I believe that we should camp outside Parliament if it doesn't do its work. And I'm not saying throw stones. I'm saying we should camp outside there to make a committee do its work, whether it's health, whether it's housing, whether it is education. We need to make sure that our Parliament starts functioning, because the second largest party in our Parliament today is people who don't vote. And increasingly, the majority of young people in South Africa are saying democracy is irrelevant.
Right. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, more SMSs, more calls and emails. gwala@sabc.co.za.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Another email from Charles Matuludi says it's misleading that legislatures and parliament are representatives of public interest. The parliamentarians are taking their mandates from party caucuses and party executives rather than the public mandate. That's why there's incoherent planning for infrastructure development programs where legislators assume public interest. The parliamentarians are representing their shadows, talking to themselves, and very far from the real public issues. They come back to mass meetings and take mandate from their constituencies. Kind regards, Charles Matuludi. That is an email. Another email came through. Okay, we've seen this one from Tsepo Moyane, who says Parliament is failing in its core mandate of making the executive accountable. Let me look at some SMSs here. David Mtunzi in Mabato says, conversing in English is the order of the day. Use vernacular as the majority language in Parliament. That's David Mtunzi. Another one, Tula, who knows contents of performance contracts? Nobody except JZ, hence he will fire Cele but not Mtsecha. Civil society must go to court to get these contracts. Frank says, electoral system is undemocratic, jobs for pals and no actual accountability to people by politicians. Andy Leak in Bloemfontein. Organizations for different professionals have to look at issues affecting society, not only their interests. There is also Gids in Pretoria, who says the ANC has failed in all its 100 years history. They ravaged everything left by Fevoet. For blacks, it is just a shame of being under the black spell. Mike in KZN, the ANC is a joke, and consequently so is the government. The DA is the only sane structure in the country. But just a quick one on that, Mr. Ahmed, because is it by design? Do you think that the ANC has gone out of its way to weaken Parliament, or is it just it happens? It's coincidental.
Xolani, I think it's a serious mistake to say that the ANC has destroyed everything.
Yeah.
That's a serious mistake. Since we came to power, we inherited enormous inequality, and the inequality is at the heart of our debate. The inequalities have worsened, and that's very important to remember. We also inherited a white corrupt state and white homeland, black homeland corrupt leaders. And many of those homeland leaders, if not the majority of them, have now taken over the ANC in their areas. So it means to some extent that we are faced with a party that has been totally transformed by interests that are not the interests of what is normally elected policy and stated policy. And that means, and it's not simply the party, it is the state bureaucracy. And that means that the bureaucracy does what it wants to. And if we had an effective parliament, Parliament would oversee that. And I would say that, again, here it comes to the limits of civil society. And the limits of civil society, let's say Mangubane says, ensuring that Parliament is accessible. If we had a constituency MP for where she lived who is elected by the people, the person would speak in her language. The person could be asked, make sure that the legislation is translated into Zulu or Afrikaans or whatever. It's vital that that MP then takes that mandate from the community or the community's concerns or the community support back to Parliament. But that doesn't happen in an effective way.
Bishop, let me bring you in. A couple of, in fact, 2 weeks ago or so, I had Dr. Mamphela Ramphele on the show. She raised the issue of the ANC having demobilized civil society. But that issue, interestingly, was also raised on Wednesday. I had a professor here, Professor Teblanche, who was talking to me about his book, also raising the mistakes surrounding the demobilization, for instance, of the UDF and other parts of civil society. What is your take there?
There is a sense in which people in power choose what voice they will hear. An example, when this new president came into power, the SSC's executive, on which I serve, took it upon itself at least to congratulate him and have a session with him. We took something like 3 months to gain an audience with the president. A subsequent meeting was held with him. Issues were raised, and we promised from the Office of the Presidency that progress reports on the requests that had been made by the Council of Churches, there would be a bilateral structure to maintain conversations. That's never taken off. I wouldn't say that there was a deliberate idea to shut civil society off, but there is a sense in which you're just not quite sure that there is much willingness in terms of participation, particularly if your views seem to be not that of the dominant party. So there is a sense in which there is a concern around this.
Mangubane, are you also concerned about the seriousness within which civil society is treated?
Yes, I am concerned. It seems like our voice is not heard. I will make the example of the Traditional Courts Bill. The government facilitated a process where public hearings were held in all 9 provinces in the country, and 4 provinces said the bill must be scrapped. 3 said it must be amended. And on May 30, the committee in Parliament, National Parliament, was supposed to discuss the mandates. We flew into Cape Town to sit in Parliament as observers to hear how they were going to tackle the issue of the mandates. They were not tackled. First, it was we are going to have another round of public hearings at a provincial level, and now that has changed. We hear that they are saying they are going to have another round of public hearings in Parliament at a national level. Again, the civil society is not informed. I only heard at the conference in Cape Town that part of the reasons why they need another round of public hearings is that some people are saying they didn't know about the public hearings. And I'm worried about why people didn't know about the hearings. I will make the example of the public hearing in Potchefstroom. There we had like 300 chiefs. Traditional leaders were there, and I would assume that it was their responsibility to inform the communities that there are going to be public hearings in KwaZulu-Natal. Okay. As a group of women, out of 300 chiefs, we were only like 25 women in the group. the hall was just full of traditional leaders.
Completely outnumbered, clearly.
Yeah.
All right. Let me take your closing comments here, Mr. Ahmed.
My closing comments would be that our constitution mandates our government to ensure that participation. Our parliament is not simply a parliament of representation, it's also a parliament of participation. But that, I believe, now civil society must mobilize on a very large scale to ensure that that participation takes place. And similarly, particularly on two areas, we must reform the Electoral Act and we must ensure comprehensive party funding reform.
Okay. Just very briefly again, Mangubane.
My closing comment is that as women, as rural women, we are not fighting against our government. We put them in power. They must account to us as the civil society, and we do not apologize for that. We are also saying the leadership in national parliament and the legislatures, as well as political parties, need to encourage a culture that is receptive and responsive to critical voices, like the voices of ordinary women like myself. And this includes openness to the opinions of the public and organized civil society.
Okay, I'm completely out of time. I've got to thank you all for coming through today. Zaki Ahmed of the Social Justice Coalition, Sizani Ngubane of Rural Women's Movement, as well as Bishop Lunga Gasiboto representing the Christian community. I've got to thank the team who put it all together for us this day. Our producers Misho Shandlale and Wisane Makubele. Senior producer Lungile Mabaso. Technical producer Mark Preller today. Chief producer Budzi Lukoto. Executive producers Busi Chane and Obrisi Chia. Olane Gwala will be back again then 6 to 9 tomorrow. Now though it is 9 o'clock and that means time for Morning Talk. Cheers from all of us. Morning Talk. Cheers from all of us. Morning Talk. Cheers from all of us. Morning Talk. Cheers from all of us.